Hey everybody, welcome back. Now we can call this officially Shepherdstown 158. If you've ever heard of the Battle of Shepherdstown before, maybe it's some sort of an afterthought to the Battle of Antietam or the button on the end of the Maryland campaign, but there's really a lot going on with this. You know, there are some accounts that suggest maybe Lee was going to continue the campaign even, after the 18th, before this battle at Shepherdstown. If you've heard of this, maybe you've heard of, that there's a ford nearby. Maybe you, of course, talk about the Potomac River, which is right behind you, and we'll see shortly. And if you've heard of anything on the battlefield itself, maybe you've heard about Pendleton and the loss of some artillery and A.P. Hill lashing back. But if you've heard of anything on the battlefield itself, it's usually the cement mill. And we're standing not at the cement mill, but at the furnace for the cement mill. What cool ruins we can see right here. These are really nice, and I'm really happy that the American Battlefield Trust and its partners and members have helped to preserve more than 350 acres here at the Shepherdstown battlefield. Smaller than the Battle of Antietam, but very important indeed, nonetheless. And we're going to talk about that. But before we do, we have to get from the end of the Battle of Antietam, up until 2 days later on the 19th. So let's just pan over to our friend Dennis Frye.
Let's go on down to the river. Come on down here for a moment. Now the first thing I want you to do is just look at this. You can see the Potomac River. Potomac River in the background. Now keep in mind, during the Civil War, the Potomac River is this. I'm going to give you two words that I bet you've never thought of with regard to definition of the Potomac River. Potomac River equals international boundary. International boundary. Right now, we're standing in the Confederate States of America. That is the United States. Yeah, I'm not in the United States. I'm on the Confederate bank of the Potomac River. Yeah, we got two countries here. You can see both countries. This is a really important place because there's a ford here, known as Boatler's Ford or Blackford's Ford. They're not here because of the furnaces or the cement mill, but because of the crossing. This ford is so important to Robert E. Lee, both coming and going. The coming part is this. Antietam's this direction, not very far from here, about 3 miles. Sharpsburg, Antietam, that's where Lee is. You know where Stonewall Jackson is? He's not there. He's not over there. You know where 2 out of every 3 Confederate soldiers is? They're not there with Lee. They're this way at Harper's Ferry. And so when Lee stops at Sharpsburg to reunite his army that's been divided by Special Orders 191, Jackson finally succeeds in bringing about the capitulation of Harper's Ferry on September the 15th, yesterday. Lee sends an immediate call to Jackson. Get your tail up here, or words to that effect. Get up here. I need you here. And so this isn't the most direct route, but the safest route from Harper's Ferry to Sharpsburg and Antietam was via Boatler's Ford across the Potomac River. Now you can see a break in the river here. This actually is not the ford. That's way too straight for a ford. That's a dam. That's a hydraulic dam that backs up water on the Potomac to give us water that's fed into the furnace and into the mill here, the cement mill. But just below us, and I can hear it. You may not be able to hear it. I'm going to stop for just a moment and see if you can hear the river. That roar sounds like rapids in the river. What is rapids? Shallow. Those rapids are part of Boatler's or Blackford's Ford. And of course, all a ford is an upheaval where the rock comes up in a body of water and it allows you to cross over that water without a boat. Lee's got no pontoons here. There's no bridge crossing here. You get across the river by going through the river on this upheaval of rocks, Boatler's Ford. So this is critical to Lee because this is how Jackson joins the army. So on the 15th and the 16th, Jackson and his men are racing from Harper's Ferry towards Sharpsburg, crossing the river here and going that way into Maryland. Remember, about 3 miles to join General Lee. All right, let's fast forward. Battle of Antietam happens on September the 17th. Yeah, you know about A.P. Hill, the last Confederate troops that arrive on the field just in the nick of time to save Lee's army from possible destruction. You know what? Hill crosses the river right here. This is where his men come across. So this is really part of the 17th. Well, despite Hill's valiant efforts, Lee determines that he cannot hold the field at Sharpsburg, and on the 18th, the night of the 18th, Lee orders a withdrawal back into Virginia in the darkness. So McClellan doesn't know he's disappearing. And that night of the 18th, 19th, the Confederate Army will come to the other side. See this, huge burning torches, flaming torches out in the river as a guide to light up this place in the darkness so the Confederates can see their way, see their way across the river back to Virginia, back to the Old Dominion, back to home. They are home. This is not where Lee wants to be. He wants to be in Pennsylvania, not in Virginia. So this campaign has failed in terms of its mission. But Lee's not finished yet, because you see, the Battle of Antietam or Sharpsburg, that wasn't the end point. That wasn't the concluding point. Lee is literally doing a retrograde, not a retreat. Not a retreat. It is a retrograde. Garry mentioned that some say Lee intended to continue the campaign. Well, I can do better than that. Lee says he's going to continue the campaign. He writes to his president, Jefferson Davis, I am going to continue, or words similar to that. So when Lee comes back here to Virginia, it's not to quit. It's not to stop. It's not the end. What Lee intends to do is maneuver. He comes back to Virginia, gets his force here into Virginia, and then he intends to go upstream and recross the Potomac River at Williamsport and continue the campaign in Yankee land. That's what Lee's plan is. So don't think of it as an end. Don't think of it as an end. Well, to make this plan effective, Lee needs to make sure the Yankees stay over there in Maryland. They got to stay over there. So he will defend this location, this ford, to ensure no harassment. And that's where our story continues.
Now we're going to go just a little ways up the hill here. We'll be back in a sec. We're standing here at the foot of what soldiers in this battle called the cliffs. And I don't think they're underestimating. I think they're exactly right. Now, it's not all cliffs, but there is a substantial portion of this Virginia shore that is cliffs practically right down to the river. And Lee is counting on this as a defense to buy him some time. He has already sent Jeb Stuart and the Confederate cavalry up to secure the crossing at Williamsport upstream, preparatory to Lee moving the entire army there to re-enter Maryland. And so this is a continuation of the campaign. But he's got to hold this ford, and to do that he leaves behind 44 cannons of various, some of his reserve artillery, some of the guns that were not heavily engaged at the battle, and he leaves this under the command of his head of artillery of his army. This is General Pendleton. And he tells Pendleton, you have 2 brigades of infantry to support your guns. Pendleton says that ought to be sufficient to hold the ford against the Union. What Pendleton didn't do was count his men. 2 brigades of Confederate infantry after the Battle of Antietam was about 600 men. 600 men in 2 brigades. And so essentially what's going to happen is the Union 5th Corps is pursuing with Pleasanton's cavalry out front. They get to the Maryland side and they exchange some shots back and forth, artillery and some small arms. But toward dusk, there's going to be a volunteer party that rushes across the river down at the ford here, and essentially the Confederate guns
take off. Everybody leaves because there's only 600 infantrymen to oppose this Union infantry force that's coming across the river in far superior numbers. So on the night of the 19th, after Lee has crossed that morning and through the night before, now on the evening of the 19th, the Confederate defenses here have collapsed at the ford. And this is not what Lee needed. Pendleton will ride to Lee's headquarters and basically alert them that, hey, things have gone badly. And so Lee will order A.P. Hill and his entire division. In fact, he orders Jackson's wing, but the only one capable of obeying the order is A.P. Hill's division, to come back in the morning of the 20th and secure the ford. And essentially, then A.P. Hill is moving back toward the ford from the direction of Charlestown. And on the morning of the 20th, the 5th Corps is pretty much occupying the Maryland bank. McClellan is here. Fitzjohn Porter, the commander of the 5th Corps, orders a reconnaissance in force. And so the battle on the 20th is essentially a reconnaissance in force that went bad. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, a reconnaissance in force is where you send out a sufficiently strong amount of troops, hopefully with some cavalry out front, to contact the enemy, see what strength they're in, and then fall back to report that information back to your commander. The problem on the 20th, number one, there's no cavalry. They've received word that Stuart is crossing up at Williamsport. Half the cavalry is sent up there to confront him. The other half are back on the other side of Sharpsburg at Keedysville, still getting food for their horses, getting themselves equipped, etc. So this is now going to be a reconnaissance in force with infantry. Not ideal. But they send out a brigade of regulars across the ford, and they go up the Troth Road in the direction of Charlestown, where they believe that the Confederates are located. And another brigade crosses behind these regulars that is to take this road in this direction and secure the town of Shepherdstown, about a mile and a half upstream, and full of Confederate wounded soldiers who could now be made prisoners. And a second or third brigade after that was coming over, again as a support. And when this brigade of regulars that went out the Troth Road gets about a mile and a half from the ford, they find A.P. Hill's division advancing. They're now going to, as a reconnaissance in force would be supposed to do, fall back in good order. And essentially the idea is that other troops, the 3rd Brigade, that's been put up on the high ground here to cover the retreat of the regulars down the Troth Road, are now going to fall back as well. Everybody's going to fall back across the river, no problem. But the problem occurs when one regiment, a new regiment, recently recruited in Philadelphia, the 118th Pennsylvania, the Corn Exchange Regiment, the colonel didn't think the order had been conveyed to him properly, so he didn't obey it. Technically, he's right. Practically, he's made a huge mistake. And so what happens now is, as A.P. Hill's division descends from the high ground toward this regiment, which is poised literally about 150 yards in front of that cliff, they're now going to be faced with a very uncomfortable decision. They're pretty much alone, facing Hill's division of over 3,000 men, with a couple of hundred men in this new Pennsylvania regiment. And they can either surrender, or they can try to come down those cliffs under fire and get back across the river somehow. And, of course, they can stand where they are and get shot and killed. And so, essentially, this reconnaissance in force did everything it was supposed to do except for one regiment, the 118th. And they went into this battle with 737 men, and they're going to lose 269 casualties, all because their colonel didn't like the way he received an order. It's a classic example of what can go wrong in an untrained and new regiment. And so the ultimate result of this is the Confederates have driven the Union soldiers back across the river. But, as Dennis alluded to earlier, and Garry, the importance of the Battle of Shepherdstown cannot be overlooked, because this is where the Maryland campaign ends. Lee crossed this river hoping to re-enter Maryland upstream. McClellan pushes this reconnaissance in force out because he wants to pursue Lee into Virginia. And even though the casualties here are small, about 300 and some Federal casualties altogether, and fewer than that in the Confederates, the importance is this. Both commanders decide to abandon the campaign. Lee is going to fall back ultimately to the vicinity of Winchester and rest and recuperate the Army of Northern Virginia. By the end of October, he's got 60,000 men again. McClellan is going to do the same thing with the Army of the Potomac. He's going to guard the fords to keep Lee from coming in again, but he is going to let the Army of the Potomac rest and recuperate. That's what they need. But as the former superintendent of Antietam used to say, the Battle of Antietam ends at Shepherdstown. And I would say more than that, the Maryland campaign of 1862 ends at Shepherdstown, and that makes it a vitally important battlefield and one that is well worth all the money that we have put into preserving and interpreting it.
Watch out.
I so adore my dear friend Tom, and I agree with everything he just said, with one exception. One exception. And I think Tom would actually agree with this. And that is that, yes, the Battle of Antietam ends at Shepherdstown, but the Maryland campaign does not. The Maryland campaign ends upriver at Williamsport. Because, as Tom mentions, Jeb Stuart has crossed the river there, and Confederate cavalry has created a bridgehead there. And that's where General Lee intended to recross the Potomac and continue the invasion. Well, what happens if there aren't any Yankees up there to stop him? Why would he not continue the invasion? Even considering what happened here at Shepherdstown. If there's nobody at Williamsport to block Lee, let's go! Let's go! But McClellan, yes, I'm going to compliment George McClellan, so get ready for this. McClellan blocks him again. He thwarts him yet again. McClellan had to stop to let that car go. McClellan anticipates Lee's maneuver. McClellan actually foresees what Lee is doing. Now that is something he gets no credit for. McClellan sends cavalry, half of his cavalry, to Williamsport, not on an excursion, but to block the Confederates from going north. And not only does he send his cavalry there, he's going to send most of the Union 6th Corps there. 11,000 men, infantry, to block Lee from going north. And so, yes, Shepherdstown is a stunner. Lee doesn't expect it. Lee's rear is threatened. Lee is confused. Once again, McClellan has attacked unexpectedly, but the real stopper that convinces Lee, okay, I'm done, we're not going anywhere, we're not going into Pennsylvania, occurs at Williamsport, where George McClellan purposely, intentionally, once again blocks him.
I just love hearing my friend Dennis Frye talk about how smart and good McClellan is as a general. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm coming back on with my mask to show that there are historic masks out there. Our good friend Jeff Griffith on his Zazzle account is actually making these. And if you can combine the Hamilton movie or the Hamilton show and the Battle of Yorktown or the Siege of Yorktown, done. Get this mask. In any case, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not very graceful with this, you know, the Trust and its partners, there's a great local Shepherdstown preservation group here, as well as the Save Historic Antietam Foundation, have been able to save more than 350 acres, plus additional easements in the area, including the cement mill location and the furnace, and up beyond there as well. So there's more work to be done, but we're really happy here. Two, when you come to Shepherdstown, this is a great place. After you've had your Nutter's ice cream and checked out the Antietam battlefield and the back streets of Sharpsburg, come on to Shepherdstown. What a cool place. Enjoy a meal or maybe even a stay on the Potomac River at the Bavarian Inn. Great restaurants here. It's a cool town. You might even see the name of Wesley Culp hanging around there, so check that out as well. Finally, thank you to everybody for watching so much as this has been going on during Antietam and Maryland Campaign 158. To Chris White, who put a lot of this together and has done the yeoman's work behind the camera, thank you. And to Connor Townsend and to Shannon Doherty and to all of our guests that we've had today and the other days as well. I thank them and thank you all, and thank you mostly for spreading this word and for supporting battlefield preservation.